Welcome to Savannah.
Still walking the dog, Mr. Glover?
Yes, sir.
Oh, my land, where are my manners? What can I get you to drink?
Town and Country flew me down to write a 500-word story on a Christmas party.
Not just any party.
I may be leaving tomorrow. You're leaving tonight. What happened?
Oh, that Jim Weems went and shot somebody. Can of pay?
Hello and welcome to episode 52 of We'll Review It Ourselves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Mostly 2 weeks, we will take a movie randomly selected from our shelves and we will review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan, and joining me as always is...
As always, it sounds so like blasé about that. You know?
I was trying to dip in an entertaining way. If you don't think it was entertaining, then I will happily say, and joining us as always is...
That's better. It's Dan Burke.
Okay. Hi, Dan. How's it going?
Hello. Hey. Doing all right.
All right. 52 episodes deep. Again, thank you for your patience on our impromptu hiatus, and we appreciate you sticking with us, because it's kind of cool. We like our fans. We do. And again, apologize for the lengthy delay. Episode 52, we are talking about Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
Ta-da!
Yep. We don't have any listener feedback, so we're just going to skip right through that and go to how did this movie get on your shelf, Dan?
You know, that's a funny thing, because, you know, we in the preliminary, we were discussing that, you know, this is one of those, you know, kind of standalone movies that are good. Don't get me wrong. This was a good movie. I enjoy it. Obviously, I own it. But, you know, it's not the most exciting. It's not something that you're like, oh, I feel like watching this again or whatever. You know, it's like kind of the every once in a while type movie. So I thought about this answer, and I just think it's probably just, you know, because it had Kevin Spacey in it. You know, at the time, I was a big Kevin Spacey fan. Still am. You know, I know he's had some recent troubles. He kind of disappeared off the headlines for a little while. I'm not sure where his situation went.
Actually, he was just in the headlines the other day for something about the video footage in a bar or something.
Huh. I didn't see that, but nonetheless, you know, he hasn't done anything so heinous that where it's like, yeah, I'll shake my head and be like, oh, Kevin, but not so much to where I have to throw away his movies.
Now, in the United States of America, the legal precedent is innocent until proven guilty. However, in the court of public opinion, we're not required to adhere to that at all. So, that being said, the charges are rape. I mean, that's kind of a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Is that? I mean, I only asked because you had said that, you know, it was one of those charges were not so heinous or whatever. I mean, it seems like kind of a heinous thing. Or did you not know about the rape charges?
Actually, that is kind of news to me. I know there were allegations of misconduct. I didn't know they were that criminal. Yeah, that's a bit news to me. And if in case people's like, somebody says, you know, it's like, what do you mean you didn't know about that? Weren't you reading? No, I wasn't reading. I mean, you know, I'm not one to look into deep celebrity news. So unless it really jumps out like the Harvey Weinstein situation, I didn't know. So yeah, that's my inattentiveness, my lack of research. So the next thing to look at is like, you know, how he and everyone else deals with that. You know, it's just, yeah, like I said, innocent until proven guilty. If he's proven guilty, I'll have to reassess my relationship, if you will. But
I while you were talking, I did Google that real quick, and I take that back. It's not rape; it's sexual assault of an 18-year-old. He's in Massachusetts District Court for allegedly sexually assaulting an 18-year-old. And I don't know the details. I didn't click on the story, but I will say, and ladies and gentlemen, I am not condoning sexual assault. And I think
we are not condoning it.
Okay, I can't speak for you unless you speak. So we are not condoning. We as a podcast do not condone sexual assault. And the charges, or at least the thing is, Spacey stuck his hand inside this 18-year-old's pants and grabbed his genitals. So that's kind of a thing. But my point in saying we're not condoning sexual assault is, until I clicked on the story and refreshed on more of the details, there are times when, a touch can be misconstrued as sexual harassment, and given Kevin Spacey's other alleged actions where he, I guess, allegedly ground his pelvis on a minor or something. I don't recall all the details. It's kind of hard to tell, and I'm not trying to walk that sticky line. But if it's like I accidentally, if somebody accidentally brushed up against somebody's butt, then I might be able to forgive that as a, we'll call it a misunderstanding that blew out of control. It's funny because not funny, haha, but it's odd. It's intriguing that this all came to light because of the Me Too movement, which is generally associated with women. But the men get sexually assaulted too. Mm-hmm. So, and it's. Wow! Before we ever even get to the movie, we're hitting the deep stuff. Yeah.
I had a feeling that this movie was going to touch a lot of deep stuff because there's a lot of underlying undertones.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, and I want to take this moment and as in the parlance of some folks, put a pin in it. Let's just hold on to this thought, because I would like to find out how this movie got on your shelf, and I'll tell you how it got onto mine, and then we can launch right into the discussion that, quite honestly, in my notes, I was like, do I think we're going to discuss it, or should we discuss it? Obviously, we're going to, so let's get through this, and then we'll talk about that, okay?
Okay. All right, so like I said, I believe I saw this in a rare moment of peace between my sister, and I. I think we took our mom to the movie, and we watched it in the theater. And like I said, Kevin Spacey seemed like an interesting story at the time. I found it at a video store, the old cardboard and plastic frame DVD case, like we talked about.
I was entertained by that when it popped up, so yeah.
Yeah.
When I pulled it out, I'm like, oh, hey, cool.
Yeah. So, like I said, that's pretty much how it was, for no other reason. Because, like I said, this is a standalone movie. It's a singular story. It stands alone. Doesn't need a sequel. Doesn't need a franchise. Doesn't have any Easter eggs, unless you're, interested in the historical value of the scenery and the story, and like you've read the book and everything. But other than that, like I said, it's pretty much a independent gem, so to say.
A standalone little piece of filmmaking that ties in with the book, and I'll get to it more, but I know someone that's from Savannah, so I called them after I watched the movie and asked them some questions about this story, because it's based on a real thing, and about Savannah in general, so we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. This movie is on my shelf because I liked Kevin Spacey. I was on kind of a Kevin Spacey kick. Same reason you bought it, sounds like, or at least similar. And I was upping my DVD collecting game. I know I've spoken about this before, but I never really bought a lot of VHS. And I did have a large number of VHS tapes stolen from me at one point, so I'd kind of shied away from collecting movies in that vein, and I only had the VHS tapes that really, really meant something. I mean, in the sense that I had Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, the box sets like that. So when I made the shift to DVD, I started picking up a lot more because I thought, yes, I'm in this on the ground floor. I'm going to start getting the DVDs. And this one kind of came with the idea of collecting more movies. It was it was a good movie. It had good actors. It had a lot of actors that I liked. I liked John Cusack. And I hate doing this because it seems like we do this rather often, but it had that guy that was in that movie that one time, and that guy that was in that other movie, and that guy that I've seen on television, and and he's in this movie, and that guy that I confused for somebody else. So there were a lot of people that I'm like, oh hey, that guy's in it, or that girl's in it, So that's why this movie's on my shelf. And I agree with you. It's one of those movies that I don't have to watch repeatedly. It's kind of it's on. I think I'll watch it. I think I've seen it more in random channel flipping, like, oh, hey, that's on. I'll watch a few minutes of it and then go off and do something else. I don't recall the last time I actually pulled the DVD off the shelf. So it kind of meets the purpose of the podcast of dusting off a movie and rewatching it. So that's how it got on my shelf.
Yeah, so that's...
And with that... I'm sorry, you were saying?
Oh, no, I was like, yeah, that's pretty much, like you said, the whole purpose of the podcast, and that's pretty much what happened here. And like I said, I probably wouldn't have pulled this off the shelf probably for another couple of months, if not a few years, before I watched it.
Yeah, I think the only time it's been off my shelf is to be packed into a box to be moved to the next location.
There you go.
But now that we've watched it, now we've explained why it's on our shelf, or at least how it got there. Let's rejoin our previous conversation and get back to talking about Kevin Spacey and sexual assault allegations and all of that other crazy stuff for two reasons. One, because we were already talking about it, and two, I'd kind of like to get past that part of the conversation.
Yeah, okay. It's
that awkward, uncomfortable part.
It's not just that the awkward, but I mean, it is a discussion that could easily dominate several hours worth of conversation. And
yes,
and it's not to diminish the importance of the subject, but it's not what we're all about. We will mention it, we'll acknowledge it, we'll have our opinions and everything, but yeah, I wouldn't want it to dominate the entire thing, because there is a lot of other things to talk about. So,
absolutely. And again, the part of the reason that this movie works kind of well with that line of conversation is because of the theme of the movie. So, or at least one of the it's one of the main aspects of the movie is the character's hidden sexuality. And in the Deep South, and in the genteel society that is Savannah, Georgia, or was rather at the time. So I think that Kevin Spacey being accused of sexual harassment or sexual assault rather with a man, and there have long been rumors that he was gay, but to have that be a thing, because I think he actually used that as a justification, or rather an excuse for what he did, or at least in his apology statement, he said, well, I'm gay. Like that excuses it. So I'm not quite sure what you meant to accomplish with that. That was a little frustrating on his part. Were you aware of that?
I had heard that, yeah.
Okay. Because, and that is interesting. I mean, I tend to think that I'm more like you in that I don't care what celebrities are doing and what's going on in celebrity gossip and all that kind of stuff. But it sounds like I actually pay more attention to it than I thought I did, and apparently more than you do. So, but not as much as others.
Well, varying levels of interest. It's like again, it's like I appreciate that there is such a thing as a Me Too movement, that the power dynamics are changing. It's about time. But at the same time, when it's like when you got the main. What's the word I'm looking for? When you got the main core of a movement or a subject matter, it sweeps up a lot of other things in its wake, and you don't exactly pay attention to every buoy and swimmer that gets bobbed in the wake of something moving through the water.
That is an excellent analogy, and I agree with you. Sometimes people get so wrapped up in saying the Me Too thing that they forget that there are actually people in the water.
And I'm aware of it, but
so
you're pretty certain that a lot of the people who get bobbed in the wake are not necessarily being drowned by it. They bobbed in it. And you're like, okay, he's cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I don't want to speak to like the legalities of things. I mean, this is just an observation from my and I'll call it my place of privilege, where I've never been accused of sexual harassment or sexual assault or anything like that. So I don't know what it's like to have to fight that accusation. But on the flip side, I would rather that accusation be investigated than simply dismissed as he said, she said, or he said, or she said, she said, whatever. It's interesting to watch some of the conversations about this case, Kevin Spacey, and others in general, because there are so many people that will pull out well, what about false accusations? Okay, what about them? If they are false accusations and they are proven to be false, then charge the person with filing the false statement.
And that's the thing, it's like instead of the he said, she said, and the court of public opinion and everything, I would much rather everything be investigated openly, transparently, and everything, so that way when everything comes out, that the concern isn't more of a culture or a power dynamic or anything. It's like, oh, well, women can make accusations, but if they're false, they can get away with it. No, the focus should be on the due process of the law. And we're not there yet, because I still hear a lot of people going, oh, because it's, somebody's playing the race card or somebody's playing the sex card or somebody's... No, I there's a long way to go before we get to the point where we're just looking at due process of the law. And I can speak to personal experience on that, because early in my EMT career, I had an accusation of sexual harassment placed on me. And it came out of left field, because I had absolutely no idea who was accusing me. Which I think the AMR, the company I worked for at the time, really mishandled it. Because, I was, you remember we were instructors in the Navy, and we always had to kind of touch on that subject matter to our students periodically, because it was a real subject that the Navy wanted to keep a firm control on, because it happens, so you and I can firmly say we know kind of how to handle this situation, and they didn't do it the Navy way or the right way, in my opinion, at all. I never got to face my accuser. I never got a formal list of charges or stuff like that. I just put on administrative leave for 3 months until somebody said, yeah, we did the investigation, which I took no part in. And they said, yeah, we found out there was no misconduct. You can come back to work. And that was it. And everything. And, I'm glad that it was investigated, so to say. It must have been, and I took that as truth, because nothing ever really followed me after the 16 and a half years that I worked for that company. So whether or not I agree with the way the investigation was done, the result was that it never, quote unquote, haunted me.
Well, and that's good. And I think one of the biggest issues that people have with the accusations and all that is what we had discussed mere moments ago, with the difference between the court of public opinion and a court of law. Because in the court of public opinion, if you were somebody famous, you would have already been convicted and been shunned, and it's not held to the same standard because we only like, and I know this is not exactly a fair comparison, but we talk about OJ. Me personally, I think that OJ Simpson killed his wife. I think he did it. I think that he got off because his lawyer told a great story and he made the case about something other than the case and swayed the jury into acquitting him. Now, in a court of law, he's innocent. He didn't do anything. So, it's an example of why celebrities get tried differently than normal people, because if you had gone to court for that, you'd have been just a face in the crowd, and it wouldn't have mattered.
I believe that was something Chris Rock had said in one of his routines, where it's like, yeah, it was an OJ case because he was famous, his fame, his money, everything. Because if he didn't have either one of those things, then it would just be Orenthal, the murdering bus driver. That's all it would have been.
Yep. And as it was, it became a circus. So, but interestingly enough, and I say this because it's a great transition into one of the conversations that I had with a Savannah native. The OJ trial was the trial of the century, and it was on the news almost daily. I think if you watched Court TV, you could watch every single hour of the case and watch it all unfold before your eyes. My mother was a huge follower of that case. She was the get up in the morning, ooh, let's see what's going on with the OJ trial, every day for as long as she could when she was sitting at home, and then she'd go to work and she'd come home and she'd sleep, and she'd get up and she'd watch the OJ trial for the length of it. So, it captured the imagination of society. So when I watched this movie, listeners who have heard the voice and know the name of listener Jeff, he is from Savannah, Georgia, and it's on his webpage, so I'm not giving anything away that he hasn't already freely put out on the interwebs. But I called him to say, hey, I know you were probably not in Savannah when this murder occurred, and then the book was written, and then the movie was made, but your family was still there. Was this a thing that they followed? I mean, was it as big a news as the movie makes it seem like it was? And yeah, apparently it was all over the society pages. It was all over the news anytime something new would happen. And one of the liberties that the movie took with the book and the actual real life story is they condensed the 3 trials into one so that it was, it fit in the time length of a movie. I mean, who wants to watch 3 trials in a movie?
Yeah, I believe the trivia said it was like the 3 or 4 trials. It took a time of like 10 years. Yeah, they made it seem like it all happened within a week.
Yeah. But it was something that the locals in Savannah followed pretty closely. I mean, maybe not all of them, maybe not obviously, but it was all over the local news at the very least. So, it's kind of a thing where we, as a society, love to put people on pedestals, and then we love to knock them down.
Truth.
So, it was just entertaining or interesting because I like stuff like that. Like my hometown was once used for the filming of a made-for-television movie, and that was all that people talked about for a good 10 years. And here it is. I think the movie was made in 1984, and here I am still talking about it 35 years later. And now I have to look it up. Damn it. So...
No, but just to kind of bring it round and maybe kind of put the threshold on this subject and everything. So my question is that we're talking about Kevin Spacey and his misconduct or alleged misconduct, however you want to describe it. But I mean, we've talked about in previous movies, especially like how why I choose to shun Mel Gibson's movies.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the person that he's become and everything, and why, and obviously to some extent Bill Cosby's. Every now and again, I'll watch an old scene because it's a childhood memory, but I've kind of just not really endorsed his work anymore. I mean, yeah, it's a difficult scale to really navigate on and everything. So my question to this, like, at what point or how bad does it have to be for you before you sweep up someone's previous artwork with the person because of their conduct? What's your threshold? What's your how much is too much to where you're like, what, I don't even want to see this person on film, or
That's a good question. I don't really have a good answer for that. It goes back to the question that we've asked a number of times where, where do you separate the artist from the art? I don't know that that's a hard question. I don't have an answer.
It is a hard question because it'll probably be one we ask several times in other movies that we deal with, and I think I've mentioned this before, is that I had a conversation like this with one of my cousins, and it sparked because he said he no longer watches Woody Allen movies, which I remember in our younger days he absolutely loved Woody Allen movies. He loved his humor, he loved his comedy, but when he had that whole situation with his adopted daughter. He says I can no longer in good conscience watch his movies, which was like, okay, and he said it was based on moral grounds and everything. But then I asked him, it's like, really? So do you listen to Mozart's music? Because he had a pretty big reputation for being not exactly the most moral individual. Especially in the zeitgeist of the times. He was a bit of a party animal. He philandered apparently. I don't know if that's a fact or whatever, but that's the things that were said to be going on. The scandalous life of you know uh, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and everything. And he said, "Yeah, I still listen to his music." And I'm like, "Then why? Why his stuff and not Woody Allen's? What's the difference?" And he said, "It's just a conscious thing. You just kind of weigh it as you go." And I was like, "Okay, I guess that's a decent enough answer." Which, real quick, because I don't want to
No, it's
dominate the
fine.
whole conversation here, but you know, jump ahead to relatively present time, and he's now back on board with Woody Allen because he said, "You know what? Yeah, it was tumultuous then, but if you look at them now, they're living happily together. They're still together. Um, they have a very private life. They've kind of stayed out of the headlines. It's like so." I guess looking back in hindsight, he said, "Yeah, maybe that was a harsh judgment on the snap or whatever."
And that and
So
that
who
happens an
knows?
awful lot where people make the snap judgment and then have to sort of recant later, if you will. Maybe that's not the right word, but where they have to go back later and review that decision and go, perhaps I was a bit hasty. Maybe I should reconsider what I've done with all these movies that I just threw out.
Hmm.
So, yeah, in this case, like, I have a few Mel Gibson movies. I haven't thrown them out because I try to separate the actor from his art or hers, but I don't know. It's such an interesting question because I don't know that there are any movies that I've ever thrown out because one of the artists involved, one of the actors, directors, whatever, was caught up in a scandal. So, I mean, it's kind of I might consider not purchasing something in the future, but from the standpoint of
Hmm.
it's already on my shelf and I just don't see the reason to throw it away because I bought it for a reason, and there are countless other humans involved in the making of the film. I mean, it's almost unfair to the 11,200 other people that were involved in that to throw out something based on the actions of one individual. Unless, of course, it's like they were saying in one of the other stories about, was it Bryan Singer, I think they were alleging had covered up for some stuff that was going on one of his films, or people were covering for him or something. In which case, I'm like, okay, if the whole film set was involved in covering this up or whatnot, then that's kind of an issue. But, I mean, I'm sure the head gaffer was not involved in anything to do with Kevin Spacey doing anything, nor was the key grip or, the lead lighting person. So...
Yeah, and that you make a very valid point on that, and that's why like I said, I don't rid myself of more movies or anything, but just and I think I've mentioned this before in another one of our episodes. So that the reason why Mel Gibson was singled out for me is because a lot of his politics and prejudices made their way into his films to the point where his quote unquote historical films became grossly unhistorical. And again, when somebody says like, well, that's Hollywood, yes, it is Hollywood. They can't always be 100% accurate. But then when I watch some of the interviews of the filmmakers, not just Mel Gibson, but his writers, and saying that, well, it's just a movie. We were trying to capture a spirit.
But you're not even making an attempt to be historically accurate.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I was like, all right, you know what? It's not just him. It's his filmmakers. It's this culture that he had. And I'm just like, forget it. I can't deal with this anymore. So that's my justification, if I bear repeating. So,
no, fair enough. Yeah, it's a valid argument for not at least watching the movies that you might own, or getting rid of the ones that you do. And again, but the other thing to that is subjective. It's a little bit different for each person. So,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, real quick sidebar, and this is maybe an awkward transitional piece, but the name of the movie that was filmed in my hometown was The Penalty Phase, and it had Melissa Gilbert in it, which Little House on the Prairie was big in my youth, so we watched that. So she showed up, she did a movie in my hometown, stayed at like the Best Western or something like that. We weren't exactly known for our 5-star ritzy hotels, so it was kind of a thing for a little while, and the movie flopped on NBC, and you can find it on IMDb, so I'll probably
and
provide
we blame your hometown for that.
No, they only used it for the courthouse, so
okay.
Filmed on location, not where it was set. But anyway, no, I'll include the link to it in the show notes because it was mildly amusing in my youth, and it was released in 1986. So there you go. I was close years ago. But in regards to Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, I kind of like to move past the Kevin Spacey thing, except to say this movie sort of ironically mirrors Kevin Spacey's rise and fall. This guy came from nothing. He rose to prominence in Savannah society, and then, sort of fell from grace. And I think that's one of the things that stereotypical Southern society movies tend to show, in the sense that when John Cusack goes to the Married Women's Club and they're all sitting around talking, and he's speaking to the hostess, or I forget what her actual title was, but she's like, oh, they're all trying to decide how they feel about it. Like, well, how do you decide how you feel about it? Either you feel this way or you don't. Like, no, they just need to know how it's going to affect their own standing. Like, oh, okay, that's kind of an upper society sort of way of looking at things. Do you agree, or is that a stereotype?
Column A, column B. I don't know. I can't say I really put much thought into that, so I don't know if I can give you a 100% honest answer on that. I don't know if it's appropriate to bring up this point that I put on the notes and everything, but one thing that Kevin Spacey said in this movie, when he was talking about his rise to fortune, so to say, it's like that he admits that he is part of the nouveau riche, the new money.
Yep.
And he said it's the riche that counts.
There you go.
And yeah, so like in that listening to you talk about the wives card club, I forget what they were called specifically again. Yeah, it's like talking about how it affects their standing and everything. Yeah, it's like, do I want to shun this man? But what if he's found innocent and everything? And well, that's a rich guy that now I've just alienated. It's like, so it's yeah, it's that power play that they always play every time.
Yeah, it's like money. What is that old saying about you? You don't have friends when you're rich. Your money has friends.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same sort of thing. And going back to one of the lines in the movie that John Cusack said that kind of resonated with me was he referred to this whole situation and Savannah society scene and what was going on as Gone with the Wind on mescaline. So, and I laughed. I'm like, holy crap. Holy crap, I had forgotten about that line, and it's kind of appropriate. It's Gone with the Wind. It's Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler, and even down to the African American help. Aside from the cotillion or the was it a cotillion? I think that's what they called it. The with the African American cotillion,
high society.
Yeah, that. The only other black people that I recall seeing in the movie were the
help.
The help, yeah, exactly. So, it was almost like holy crap! You just stepped out of time into the 80s, which is when this event occurred, and the movie was made in 1997. So there's a little bit of time delay there, but going back to what I talked to Jeff about was Savannah like this? Is this a reasonably true depiction of Savannah in that era? And he generally agreed. Now, he has not lived there for 30 or 40 years, so it's been some time. But at the time, this was Savannah. And they were the little town the little genteel southern town that prided itself on the fact that it hadn't changed. And in the times that he's been back in the recent past, Savannah has turned into a much more cosmopolitan city. So it's not quite the same. It doesn't have the same, vibe, but all of the houses are still there, and they've been restored painstakingly by the Savannah College of the Arts, or Savannah College of Art and Design. He referred to it as SCADA, and they're embracing the history, but moving into the future. So it really, Savannah is a really interesting little town. I've been there myself, but it was it was 2001. Yeah, it was like 2001, I think. St. Patrick's Day. Good time.
Yeah, it's good that we're talking about this and everything. I think this is a good segue moving from the previous subject to this one, because the other uncomfortable thing that I wanted to discuss was, again, the culture of Georgia, more specifically, or more broadly, I should say, but kind of ironic, the two. Anyways, the culture of the American South. And like you said, I mean, the only people of color you saw was either, the cotillion, their high society, or the help. And, just watching the first act of this movie, when you see the society socialites gather and they're having their party and they're, enjoying themselves and making their jokes and everything. I'm not saying that their jokes were of a subject matter that would make someone cringe, but for some reason it doesn't matter to me. specifically, it doesn't matter what they're joking about, that they're just sitting there, they're laughing, and they're enjoying their comfortable life, and it still makes me cringe, because knowing that there are other people not far from them who are having a way different experience in life than they are. And it kind of reminded me in a very unrelated movie, but Disney's the Princess and the Frog.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that movie wasn't Song of the South. It wasn't that blatant in whitewashing the whole situation in the South, but still, here you have people who are hopeful. They're poor. They're poor. They don't live in high society. They live in the slums. Living in shanties and everything like that. But they have a community, so Disney tried to paint the overall positive light on that specific situation. But still, I mean, at that time that it took place, it's just so hard to not think of the other things that were going on, the lynchings, the outright harassment and criminal behavior towards African Americans at the time. It just, and that's kind of how I felt watching the first act of this movie. It's just like, oh, this is Savannah. Yeah, it's not just a stereotype. This is just remembering what happened.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that people like to think they're more enlightened. Like, oh, well, they had, they had opportunities to get other jobs and everything. But, when you're rich, you don't necessarily notice who gets hired for what job. I do think that Kevin Spacey's character as the nouveau riche was more friendly to his help, in the sense that he appreciated them and their struggle, like where they were coming from. But yeah, it was an interesting split, and again, I didn't really speak specifically to that aspect of Savannah specifically. I keep saying that word anyway. To that aspect with Jeff, because that particular aspect of the movie could have been shot anywhere in the South, New Orleans, Montgomery, pick somewhere. It could have been anywhere. So I just considered that as a specific or as a general representation, like you said, as a broad brushstroke of what the South was like in the 80s. I like to think that it's changed, but again, I haven't been to Savannah, nor have I lived in Savannah for any great length of time. I was there for a few days in 2001, 2002, maybe. I'm not 100% sure on the dates, but it was for St. Patrick's Day, and I sadly, and this is something that I'd actually talked to Jeff about and put in my notes, is I didn't go on any of the ghost tours, and that's one of the things that the tourist association or the Chamber of Tourism or Tourist Council or whatever kind of promotes, is their ghost tours and some of the historic aspects of Savannah. So, Savannah's been used in Forrest Gump. That's where the bench is. Although the actual bench is in the Smithsonian, the location is in Savannah.
You want to hear something funny? When this movie, I guess the correct way to say it, when this movie was assigned, like I said, it had been a long time since I actually watched it. I do remember, though, it had a character who was a voodoo practitioner.
Oh my God, Voodoo Sally! Well, I don't know what her real name is. I just called her Voodoo Sally.
Okay, but I had it in my mind that this movie took place in New Orleans. It's like, so I was like, when I was watching it, I'm like, well, this isn't New Orleans. Oh, it's Georgia. Oh, okay, yeah, I remember now. I just thought that was amusing.
Yeah, again, on the list of things I actually talked to Jeff about, because I was curious, and I was basically doing the same thing. When I think of voodoo in a movie, I tend to think of New Orleans, and by extension, Louisiana. I don't generally tend to go out of there, and Georgia's a little ways away from New Orleans. So to see, again, who I have dubbed Voodoo Sally on the screen, and I'd forgotten that she opened the film sitting on the park bench, which made me think of Forrest Gump. But anyway, looking up at the plane that John Cusack was theoretically on and laughing, and I was like, oh, that's right, I forgot about the voodoo thing in this movie. That's awesome.
Which, kind of a little side note here, having worked under contract with Delta Airlines, I found it very appropriate that Delta Airlines was what opened the movie because their hub is in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's like Georgia and Delta Airlines go together like peas and carrots. You know?
Nice.
So little side note there. So
yeah, no, I loved Voodoo Sally. She was awesome. All of the scenes that she was in, you got to commune with the dead. You know, the lady that played her has been in a number of other movies, and she is one of those delightful chameleons of the same vein that Kevin Spacey used to be before he became Kevin Spacey. You know, she was just one of those people that you could see in a movie and go, I've seen her somewhere before. What have I seen her in? Nope. Nothing. Oh, wait, no, I've seen her in that. Yeah, okay, oh, and that. Yeah, oh, hey.
I don't remember her in Patch Adams, though. What part did she play?
She was one of the nurses.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember the head nurse. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Spoke up, said, leave this one alone. Oh, wait, no, that's a song. Never mind.
No, but yeah, no, I it's funny because watching this is I was like, I want to know a voodoo lady. You know, they you know, obviously she was very cool in this one. The voodoo lady in the Princess and the Frog, she was awesome. There's an episode of Barney Miller that has an Obey voodoo lady who, in the short time that she was on screen, had a very large presence that was like, I want to know someone like that. So yeah, maybe I need to go to New Orleans and find me one.
I don't think you can. I mean, I guess you could find one. You can't really take them anywhere, though. So,
well, no, I mean, but you know, have a conversation, everything. Because I did enjoy that scene when he first meets Minerva, the voodoo lady, and you know, she kind of I don't say pass judgment. Is that correct? But she looks at him and says, "It's like you ask too many questions. You have a hole in you and stuff." You know, it's like I always like those little assessments of a character.
There was some. In fact, you mentioned that because the thing that I wrote down about that was, don't know whether you go this way, don't know whether to go this way or that without answers. Tell you a secret, boy, there ain't no answers. I loved that line. It really kind of hit home for me. I mean, just, you know, it was one of those things where sometimes people get so paralyzed about trying to move in a direction because they don't have all of the answers that they don't realize, as Voodoo Sally, Minerva, actually says, there ain't no answers. You've just figured out when you get there. You know, do the thing. If the thing doesn't hurt anybody, then move forward. You know, so I love that line, and again, I kind of agree with you. I want my own voodoo lady. In fact, I would like to make the amount of money that Kevin Spacey's character makes in this movie, just so I can have my own voodoo lady to go hang out with.
Yes, have one on retainer. That's basically what.
Which is what he did. He was like. But you know, the interesting thing was Kevin Spacey's character does not believe in the voodoo, but which is curious as to why he would do it. But I believe in the spirituality of it. Like, all right, cool. It was a nice touch. It gave the movie some color in ways that otherwise it would have just been a pretty stereotypical courtroom drama.
I agree, but it also it's funny. It gives us another good segue, though. It's like here you have, you know, Kevin Spacey, who says he doesn't believe in the whole voodoo thing, but you know, he likes the spirituality part of it. You know, it's kind of this ironic juxtaposition that he seems to embody, which is kind of part of the character of Savannah in this movie. And it's just these ironic cultures that you kind of see in the South as well. And, you know, to bring up like a big example of a subject matter that I follow, you know, it's just like, it's funny that like in the Bible Belt is where you find the largest numbers of consumers of pornography. And it's just that ironic thing where the Bible Belt is supposed to be this pious, you know, Christian part of the nation, but yet you have this ironic aspect of them. You know, in this situation too, it's like you have the South, which is supposed to be again conservative, man and woman, but you have a pretty sizable homosexual community that exists there,
All under wraps.
all under wraps, but existing. And it's under wraps, but it's not like it's a big secret. They know it's out there.
But this goes to one of the core tenets of Southern hospitality is these are not things that one speaks of. We simply choose to look the other way. It's a matter of that being the actual character of the South, and I don't want to speculate, but I'm guessing, one, that it stems from the Southern desire to be like royalty, because it's very European in the sense that in the courts of kings and queens, if there was something scandalous happening, they gossiped about it, but they looked the other way, because if it didn't affect them or their money and their status, then it was just something to talk about, and it kept them entertained. So I think that was, kind of a mix of both of those things, and the South sort of kept it alive. And I'm just guessing. This is a complete and total speculation, but I suspect that part of the reason that the South sort of kept that alive was a holdover from the antebellum South, when there were perhaps plantation owners that would take their dalliances with some of their help, and we just don't speak of such things. It's that that Southern, like, no, I just choose to look the other way, that really kind of makes this movie, I think, stand out. And one of the most standout characters, and this is really the only movie that she was ever in, was the Lady Chablis.
I was just about to bring her up, because when you said something that's like people look the other way, man, when it came to Lady Chablis, how could you look the other way?
But that was a fantastic mixture of people looking the other way, but looking the other way by looking directly at her. And I don't know, I know there's a word for it, and I cannot think of what it is right now, but she drew so much attention to herself that it was almost impossible to talk about her, because she made herself the topic of conversation. It's this weird contrary existence where, because she's dominating the scene, whatever scene she's in, you don't talk about her in the way you might talk about her behind closed doors. And even if you do, she's already sort of opened it up to where she doesn't really care. I mean, yeah, I'm sure she does. I guess it's getting there ahead of you. I know you're going to talk about this, so I'm going to talk about it before you.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums her up. I gotta say, she was probably the first transgender character I've ever seen in a movie in a positive light.
I agree with that.
Yeah, because I mean, every other transgender character that I've ever seen, I mean, when it came like to the Crying Game, to Ace Ventura, they've always been treated with disgust and disdain. Somebody to be reviled. And I think this is the first and only movie that I can think of right now where they were just. She had the most human character, the most human treatment of her character that I've seen in any movie.
Yeah, and she just existed. I mean, yeah, that's absolutely right. She was just there. I mean, and there's no way you could say she was just there, because she was, again, very.
She was a presence.
Yes, exactly. But she was just living her own life and living her. She wasn't afraid of her tea, as it were.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, my train of thought got faltered there.
Well, but while you're trying to get your train of thought back on the tracks, I was going to say, apparently the youth of today will still talk about their tea, or they'll have tea. Like, oh, have you got the tea? Like, what tea? And they'll say the truth, the tea, the truth. So while they may not think that they're carrying on a decades-old phrasing, they obviously, as indicated in this movie, they most certainly are. It's kind of a what's old is new again, as each generation seeks to distinguish itself from its predecessors and to find itself as it grows and matures.
Yeah, I can't add anything to that.
Well, it just ties really well into my 30-year theory, so
yeah, that
I've espoused before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, I can't disagree with that, so I'll agree to that. I was just going to say too that that's the funny little bit of trivia here, without sounding too pedantic, but this is pretty much her in this movie. This is her from the book. This is her from real life, which I don't think happens very often, if at all, in films where the book cited an actual person who that person was found to play herself in the movie from the character in the book. I don't know if that was confusing, but
I understood it. Hopefully our listeners did as well.
But yeah, it was entertaining to see that was herself. That was her from the book, from real life /
And to build on that, one of the pieces of trivia, or one of the stories that I read, where they interviewed Clint Eastwood about this movie, because he directed it, and his daughter was in it.
Yeah, another revelation. I totally forgot this was a Clint Eastwood movie, but yeah.
and we'll come back to that, because I had as well. But to the point, when they spoke with him, he said that there were so many times where they didn't give her a script, they just let her go. And they called her a one-take wonder, because she would just do her thing, and it was, oh, well, that's wonderful. We're just going to roll with that. Especially her nightclub scenes, where she was just riffing on the audience and heckling the audience right back or whatever. Most of it was ad-lib and done in one take. So she was, like you said, a presence, and she knew where she fit in the world, which is, kind of refreshing. There's so many people that don't, which once again is one of the themes of this movie.
I absolutely loved her scene in the courtroom, the testimony, which kind of made me think, though. It's like when she was saying that she has a man's toolbox, and the camera went to different people to look at their different reactions. And it's sad to think, and I have to bring the downer on this one, but you probably still get the same exact reactions from people today. It's almost like we haven't really changed much as society.
Well, people fear the unknown. I don't have a really good answer for that. I like to think that you're at least partly wrong.
I'd like to think so too.
Yeah.
But, from what I've seen, and granted, social media is a very vicious place.
It is not the place you want to go to see a good cross section of moderate people in society.
Truth, but the things that you do see, and it can whittle at your hope.
Yes.
So I hope you're right and that I'm wrong.
I think sadly you're right, more than I hope, but I think the younger generation will save us from ourselves.
Yeah.
At least I have hope for them. At least still. Which I never understood, that whole, these kids are gonna, grow up to be worthless or whatever. Like, aren't you the parents? Isn't it your issue to deal with? Didn't you get us here?
Well, that's why I always laugh at whenever they make fun of kids who say, oh, he can't open a can. He can't use a can opener. What an idiot. Where did you learn to have a can opener? It's like, well, my parents taught me. Well, aren't you his parents? So aren't you the idiot for not teaching him how to use a can opener?
Yeah, let's get on that. Chop, chop.
Yeah, I never understood how they can shrug off responsibility of saying this generation is crap because my generation, learned to respect our parents. It's like, well, why didn't you teach them to respect you?
Yeah.
It's like maybe it's because you're trash and they know better.
But speaking of older generations, Clint Eastwood.
Yes, let's move on.
Clint Eastwood directed this film, and I watched it, and it was one of those things, I think you had already said it earlier. Oh, crap, Clint Eastwood directed this. I had forgotten all about that. And I like most of the movies that he's directed, and I thought, oh, this must have been one of the first ones he directed then. I mean, it's 1997. He'd been acting for a while, decided to try his hand at directing, and I went on to the IMDb and clicked on director and noticed with some amazement that he directed his first film in 1971, and that was Play Misty for Me. And listeners, if you're not familiar with it, Play Misty for Me is sort of the film, or sort of the first film version of kind of Fatal Attraction, where a lady goes a little psycho over a gentleman that she had a tryst with. So to see that in 1971, see this 26 years later, and see his most recent entry as a director and an actor, The Mule, I believe. He's been directing for a lot longer than I thought he had.
Yeah, I thought when I looked in the trivia section, it said that this movie was his 20th feature-length film to be directed by Clint Eastwood. I was like, wow, what did I miss?
Yeah, a whole bunch of stuff, apparently. Yeah.
Apparently a lot.
Yeah, and like I said, I like most of what he's directed. I liked $1 Million Baby. I loved Gran Torino. I haven't seen The Mule, but again, those are his more recent entries. It's crazy.
Yeah, his Iwo Jima movies, obviously. Yeah, it's like his war movies as of late have been a lot of focus, because everyone seems to think, oh, he's a real American. He tells a real American story. But yeah, apparently he tells a lot of stories, and it's like his range. And right there's a perfect example, kind of going back a little bit to where do you separate the artist from the art, everything. Yeah, man. Hardcore Republican. I mean, he was at the Republican National Convention, railing against Obama. Yeah. Totally don't agree with his politics, but you know what? That's his politics. That's
yelling
him.
At a chair.
That's just him yelling at a chair. But that's fine, because that's him. Doesn't bleed into his movies. He tells a good story.
And
perfect example.
And because you look at like the Bridges of Madison County, or Bronco Billy and stuff like that, where it's like, yeah, look, this is not hardcore Republican values, blah blah blah. He's making a movie. He's telling a story, and he does a great job at telling a story. So, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Well, yeah, and it's like I said, especially in this movie, to treat Lady Chablis like a human being. I mean, again, like we said, this is probably the only movie I can think of right now where somebody took a transgender person and treated him like a human being. That's so incredibly rare.
This is around the same time that Silence of the Lambs came out, and and other movies that you've mentioned. It's good to see that just sort of in the movie, and this is one of those cases where even the anti-social justice warrior snowflakes, I'm not quite sure what to call them, but the people that get offended when you change a character, or like, oh, you're just putting that person in there so that you can say you have that person in there. Like, no, really was in the story, really actually in here because she's basically retelling her part in this whole saga on which the movie is based. So it's intriguing, and I know that sometimes there is some justification for people saying, oh, you only hired that person because you needed to have an Asian person in here or whatnot. I get that. As much, again, as I would like to, not think that it happens, Hollywood is a business, and they recognize that if they have certain actors in their movies, that, they'll get people to come see it, or, it's at least a draw to some people. It happens far less than people seem to think it does. At least in my opinion. I mean, look, you put a person in a role and it works or it doesn't work. Let's discuss the movie itself and the actor or actress themselves, and not the politics or whether real or imagined behind why they were cast.
I see where you're going with this or anything. I don't know if I can follow you 100%. Because there is that aspect of, it's like, what is more influential? Does art influence life, or does life influence art?
Yes.
And I know, like, there's especially nowadays, a lot of movies where the wrong racial casting could be argued that had an impact on the box office. I mean, I think of M. Night Shyamalan's Avatar, the last.
Oh, The Last Airbender. Yep.
Thank you. It was on the tip of my tongue. I was like the windbender that didn't sound right in my head. I was so close. But yeah, I mean, the backlash on that, because it was like the all-white cast when it was supposed to be all Asians. I think it can be argued that action ruined its box office.
And to your point, I totally agree. I think that was a terrible casting decision, and I think that it did affect its box office. But the single movie that you point to, which stands out clear in your head, is one of 500 movies that were released that year. So.
And that's the thing. I can bring up a few more and everything, which will basically just illustrate that, yeah, there is a bell curve to that. There is a sine wave, if you will, that shows the varying amounts of how that's true to where it didn't matter.
Yeah.
I will concede to that. Because I mean, it's like another one that comes to mind, and it's personal because my family's from Hawaii, is when they cast. Was it Emma Stone in some movie where she's some half Hawaiian person, and like she's probably the least Hawaiian anywhere in the.
She is not half Hawaiian. Okay, and that I agree with. Like, I know the movie has not been released yet, but or if it's ever going to be released, I don't know. They keep saying it's going to, but anyway, the New Mutants. One of the original members of the New Mutants team in the comic books is Native American. And for me, when they were casting about for that role, whether we were discussing it on the internet about who was going to be playing Danielle Moonstar, I quite frankly would have been extremely frustrated had they not picked someone of Native American descent at the very least. It's just kind of like, all right, look, I don't usually get angry about the casting of characters. Like, if I read a book and go, well, let's use Harry Potter as an example. J.K. Rowling has never expressly said that Hermione was white. And in fact, it's been a thing that she discussed afterwards. It said, yeah, you know what? They discussed it when a black woman played Hermione in the Cursed Child, the play that occurred afterwards. And they're like, oh, you're changing her to black. Just like, yeah, you know what? I never expressly said she was white. I didn't expressly say she was black. She is whoever she is, and quite frankly, why is it important? Granted, we came to love Emma Watson in the role, but so what? You're telling me a good story, but there are certain times where it is important to stay true to what the artist's conception was at its creation. And again, since she never specifically said that Hermione was white or black or Asian, or Asian or whatever, she never said anything about what race she was. She could have been anyone.
And that's kind of along the lines you were talking about with the character of Spider-Man, where Stan Lee said this could be anybody, and it doesn't matter if it, what race or whatever you want to call it, occupies that character, because was never the intention of the original creator to have a specific ethnicity attached to that character.
Yeah, and that's why so many people could identify with Spider-Man, because there was nothing like Captain America had his mouth like mouth and chin exposed, and his eyes. Batman, same thing. Superman was a white guy. Spider-Man was whoever someone identified him to be. It's like, no, he's he's a black guy, or he's a white kid, or he's a Chinese kid from down the block, whatever. He could have been anybody, which goes to your point, what Stan Lee was going for, which is why when people found out that Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe was going to be Miles Morales, half black, half Latin kid, they're like, oh, it's just social justice this thing. Like, you know what? It goes with Stan Lee's vision. And quite frankly, if you've ever read that story arc, his origin story, not the one that was in Into the Spider-Verse, although that was pretty phenomenal. The death of Spider-Man and the origin of Miles Morales were freaking, amazing storytelling. And that's one of the things that, different mediums bring to the table. You can tell a good story with a comic book. You can tell a good story with a movie. And I think this, again, there are aspects of this that are a little, I don't want to say contrived because they had to fit into the 2-hour or so runtime of a movie, but Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, it's a good story, it's good storytelling, and it's based on a real story. So and I did want to kind of bring that back around. So there.
Okay, just real quick too, we were talking about character castings that people were upset by. Kind of on the flip side of it, where a character casting that got people a little upset but didn't seem to matter as far as the box office was concerned, was the casting of the Ancient One in Doctor Strange. I remember reading a few articles that the casting of Tilda Swinton caused a lot of ire amongst both comic book fans and casual observers, because they understood that the Ancient One was supposed to be an ancient Asian person rather than a white British lady.
Yes. And there is an argument to be made, not very compelling in my opinion, but they were trying to avoid the stereotype of the, ancient, wizened, Asian person. But I think, again, that's how can you tell that story without bowing to a cliche? Because the Ancient One in the original comic book incarnation was a cliche anyway. So, you could make an argument, but it's not a very good one.
Which makes me really curious now, because what's the Chinese character that's coming in Phase 4?
Oh, Shang-Chi?
Yeah, because I didn't know anything about him. I found a video about the character and said that, yeah, like the Ancient One, a lot of him and the characters surrounding him were these old, pretty horribly racist stereotypes.
Yeah.
So the fact that the MCU is going to introduce him later on, it'd be very interesting to see how well they treat him.
Yeah, and
I'm actually kind of want to see that.
And I'll be honest, I think the reason that they're using Shang-Chi is because they so screwed up Iron Fist on Netflix that they couldn't bring that around into a film version. Because I think they would have preferred to have that, not because he's a white guy. Really, anyone could be the Iron Fist. It's been pointed out a number of times. But Iron Fist, the Netflix series, was not that great. And two, there were a lot of folks talking about cultural appropriation and that sort of thing with that casting as well. So I'm intrigued. Shang-Chi has always been a very minor character in the Marvel Universe. Teamed up with Spider-Man a few times, teamed up with Iron Fist, Luke Cage, the Black Panther, and a few other characters. But he was the comic book Bruce Lee, if you will. That's why he was created, because Bruce Lee was big at the time, and they said, hey, we need an Asian kung fu character to do kung fu. So, but by the same token, the Black Panther, same thing. He was created because, hey, we need a black character to do black character stuff. And yeah, so let's do that. And we'll call him the Black Panther. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You'd love to be in those pitch meetings, wouldn't you?
all right, so we got this new character. Okay, he's wearing a costume, and it's all black. Okay, because he can slip in and out of the night, and he's black, and he moves like a cat. So we got ears, so it's like a cat. But you know what kind of cat is black? A panther. So you know what we're gonna call him? We're gonna call him a Black Panther. And you know what we're gonna do is we're gonna make the character black. We're gonna make him black. So it'll all work together with the black on black in the Black Panther. Do you see what I'm telling you, Stan? Do you see it? Can you visualize this with me?
My God, Johnson, you're a genius.
I'm moving to Hollywood and making pitches, Mom. So anyway, we have really gone down a rabbit hole on this one. How do you feel about John Cusack in this movie? Who is neither black, a panther, or in the MCU that I know of?
You know, he is missing from the MCU. God, what character would he play?
Good question. Let's get back to that.
No, I like John Cusack. He basically played John Cusack in this movie.
Well, I don't actually know him, but this seems to be a character that he plays a lot.
Well, if you watch the movie 1408,
in which he played a writer.
It's, in my opinion, pretty much the same character. Just dealing with different circumstances, but pretty much his reactions, his facial expressions, how he deals with people who are just kind of like odd to him, I guess. He's playing the same character, I think. Which, lucky for him, lucky for me, I like that character. I also saw that he got this role because of his role in Grosse Pointe Blank, which another movie of his that I absolutely adore. So yeah, I got nothing bad to say about him, man.
Yeah. Well, it's what made me laugh was, again, John Cusack does play a lot of similar roles, and this is not the first time that he's played a writer. It was this one and 2012 and 1408, and I think there was one other that I couldn't recall off the top of my head. But I'll be honest, I like John Cusack. I like most of the movies that he's been in. He is very entertaining to watch, but he's kind of one of those guys that I don't necessarily know that he sells a movie all by himself. I mean, I think we've mentioned this before. We're no longer in the day and age where it's like, hey, you gonna go see that new Schwarzenegger movie? And not because he's older and, the stuff that he's been in sucks, but, it's rare that you find a single actor or actress that will sell a movie. Like, this is that, the movie you need to see just because so-and-so's in it. We've kind of moved past that. And for, my part, I'm actually kind of happy about that because, I like to see, ensemble casts, kind of like this movie where you see a lot of people who are like I said earlier, it's that guy that was in that thing that time. Or that lady that was in that thing that time. Because the lady that played the...
or that guy that I think...
Or that...
that guy that I think looks like Carl Malden.
Yes. Or that guy that I think is Mr. Noodle but is not. Yeah. So, those days are kind of gone-ish. At least, again, for my part, I hope so. Because I like seeing people share the screen, share the spotlight. So usually now you see like so-and-so and so-and-so in the way it used to be with Bogey and Bacall and, now granted it was Bogey and Ingrid Bergman, but, there were movies that were like, hey, do you remember those two famous people? Yeah, they're in this movie. And then that disappeared for a while, and now it seems like it's kind of come back. So, once again, what's old is new.
I think part of that still kind of exists with the directors, though. You still have, it's like, oh yeah, it's another Spielberg vehicle, or another, like I said, we forgot this was Clint Eastwood, but I'm sure, Yeah,
I was gonna say, yeah, Clint Eastwood. There you go. And we just rattled off a bunch of his most recent movies. So,
but yeah, it's also, Yeah, I think the focus is like franchises.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's another Marvel movie.
Yes, I think that's the key now. But I'm sure that will end too, and we'll move on to something else.
As we all do.
And then it'll come, and then people will remember this, and it'll come right back around.
But it is kind of neat to think of that bit of Hollywood history where actors were contracted to studios and not necessarily to
Marvel Studios,
a movie franchise. Well, you kind of had that, but that was to tell a continuing story. You wanted continuity. Not just it's not like you didn't have the actors, Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans and all them. You didn't have them just to say, okay, today you're going to be Captain America. Tomorrow we're going to make this movie about this guy who goes to the South and does this or whatever. No, it's we're going to sell it because it's Chris Evans, the guy who was Captain America. This time he's going to the South and romancing some other person or whatever. No, it's the continuity. This is Captain America. They're all 21 movies.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that's a good catch or a good call on the current zeitgeist in filmmaking is keeping the same person in for a long time, sometimes longer than they need to be.
Well, no, I think MCU.
Oh no, MCU did it fantastically. That is not an example of them doing it badly.
No, I think that they made history with that franchise.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly.
And should see how they continue. But like I said, going back to ensemble casts like this movie, yeah, you basically had a movie where you just picked actors for their merits and you came up with something really good.
Yeah.
It's kind of like cooking, It's like, yeah, we're only going to get our beef from this supplier no matter what happens. And then later on,
Are you comparing actors to beef?
I am comparing them to ingredients in a jambalaya, so to say, because if you don't have the right ingredients, your stew comes out crap,
There you go.
I know.
I'm just messing with you. The one thing that we have touched on but haven't fully said, I mean, just as a sort of containerized statement, at least in my opinion, is one of the biggest characters in the whole movie.
Besides the ones we've already talked about? Okay, which one? I give up.
Yeah, the city of Savannah.
Oh, yes.
And that's the thing that I kind of wanted to touch on because, quite frankly, I mean, we could go on about some of the aspects of this movie and some of the cultural aspects of, high society or whatnot, and what it means for people to have to hide who they are and that sort of thing. But I think that, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, being in the South, the Southern hospitality of we just don't talk about that, or or the polite, I will talk to you to your face, but I must first assess how it affects me before I make a decision. It was the South in general, but there were, like I said, I mean, I called someone and it actually made me, want to go back to Savannah itself because there's a lot of interesting history in Savannah, and I have my own history with Savannah, which stems back to Jeff, and this is just a real quick aside. So Savannah for me will always have a special place in my heart. Again, I'm not from there, but listener Jeff is, and when Jeff and I were stationed together, 100 years ago, he had reminded me about Arlo Guthrie's song Alice's Restaurant Massacre, or Massacre, whichever you want. Take your pick. And I pulled into Savannah. I mean, Jeff and I hadn't been on the ship in, together in years. It was just, I got shipped over to the East Coast and we pulled in and I was singing Alice's Restaurant Massacre because I knew Jeff was from Savannah. And didn't occur to me that, it might even remotely be a thing. It was just like, cool. Guilt by association, you win. Well, I had watched one evening and I had gone out to the entrance to the industrial area where the ship was moored, and taken up my watch so that when my shipmates came back, I could look at their ID cards. And there were civilian security guards there as well. They were uniformed, so they rolled up in their little cars and did their little watch turnovers and stuff. And in the middle of my watch, car pulls up, and what is the guy singing when he gets out of the car? You can get anything you want at Alice's restaurant. And I heard that, and I was like, except in Alice. And he laughed, and I laughed, and we had a good time, and we all sat down on the Group W bench. Anyway, no, we didn't really sit on the Group W bench, but so now forever and ever, Alice's Restaurant Massacre is indelibly linked with the city of Savannah, Georgia.
Okay.
So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I know it wasn't terribly entertaining, but Savannah, one of the things that I did regret when I was there was not going on some of the ghost tours and that sort of thing. So Savannah has character. It has that, hey, come look at us kind of thing and look at our history. And I think in the way that we have expressed like New York as a character in Ghostbusters and New Orleans as a character in some other movies, Savannah is just as much a character in this movie as anyone else. That's kind of where I was going.
That's that's pretty cool. You got kind of a love affair with a city like that. It's like it's kind of and it's a city that's not your own. So to say. Because I mean, I kind of have that feeling with San Francisco, San Diego, a little bit of Osaka and Tokyo. Sydney. I haven't spent a whole lot of time in the last three. I'd like to go back sometime. But definitely, like I said, San Diego, San Francisco, everything like that. So yeah, I totally get that. I can totally be like, yeah, I understand that, and that's great that you have that.
Yeah, which is funny because I've only been there for a total of like 5 days of my entire life.
Mm-hmm. Hey, it leaves an impact. It's like some places just, what movie was it when they're saying that some places. Or remember, maybe Nina and I were talking about it, about like how some places have a vibe, they have a life to them. When we went to Disneyland, there's this place called the Anaheim Packing District, and it's a collection of restaurants and a couple other little shops and everything like that. And like I said, it had a life to it. It had a vibe, and it was it was generally positive. So yeah, when you find a city like that can have that much of an impact after only what you said 5 days. I mean, that's something special. But I have to say one thing though. I'm looking from the very opening scene when John Cusack walks out into the airport to catch a ride. Man, I just felt so uncomfortable looking at that. And it's like knowing that aspect of the South. And I'm not talking about the races. I'm talking about the damn humidity. I'm just like, I looked at that and I'm like, no.
I thought you were going to talk about the fact that his luggage had no wheels. Really dates the movie.
Yeah, that probably. But yeah, I just look at the humidity and I'm just like, oh, why is he wearing what he's wearing in that scene?
Yeah, well, he didn't know. And if you don't know, I mean, you suffer the pain. All right, I have one last thing to say about this movie, and then unless you have something else, we can move to where this fits on your shelf.
I just have one short thing to say about this, and that is just off the top of my head, a little note I jotted down. This is the second courtroom film that takes place in the South that we've reviewed.
Oh?
The first one, My Cousin Vinny.
Oh, My Cousin Vinny. Yeah. I was like, I had to rack my brain. Like, yep. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. No, the only thing I was going to say was the painting that they open up the movie with, and then they kind of close the movie with, they bring it right back around, is really, I mean, it's obviously there for a reason, and it's obviously touched on in the beginning and touched on at the end to remind you that, that this is what it was. But the intriguing statement that Kevin Spacey's character made about, when he was asked about whether or not he was going to have it x-rayed, he's like, no, I prefer not to know. It kind of really encapsulated one of the major themes of the movie, the sometimes you don't want to know what's behind the curtain or what's behind the other painting or what's behind the veneer that we show in polite society, where we don't talk about these things that happen behind closed doors. So that was it. That was the only thing I really wanted to talk about. I thought that through line was some pretty good storytelling. So
It's good.
okay, so where would this movie go on your shelf?
Well, as I stated before, this is not a bad movie. It's but it is a standalone. It's where was I gonna? It's a drama, and the story unfolds very slowly in this movie. So it's one of those like, oh, okay, I haven't watched this in a long time, and you sit down for a quiet evening to watch this. So it would go in general population.
I am inclined to agree with you. It's a good movie. It's a good story. The acting is good. The directing, such as I ever tend to notice these things. Again, it's a Clint Eastwood movie, and he generally tends to make good movies. That kind of shows through. So I expect it's because of, or at least partly because of his directing. It's a quirky movie in the sense that you have very quirky characters, and it does go some places, but I gotta say it's the leading edge of the third shelf. I mean, it's not quite second shelf, maybe, but again, the fact that I had to literally dust off the box before I opened it up kind of, shows how often I watch it. So, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a good movie. It just, it's not something that I have to constantly return home to watch and refresh myself on. So, yeah, I think general population is a decent place for it. So, all right, let's spin the big wheel and find out what's next, yo. Okay, stop talking to me.
Fine, jeez.
No, not you. I meant the computer. Okay. All right, and we are now pushing the random magic movie button.
The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey.
Oh.
Okay.
The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey it is then. What an unexpected movie. Okay, I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself.
Yes, the fake little laughs of high society.
Oh, so haughty. Okay then. All right, listeners, if you like this or any other episode that you feel you need to provide feedback on, please send us an email, leave us a voicemail, hit us up on our Facebook page, hit us up on Twitter, yell at me for the length of time between 49 and 50. Do whatever you want, just give us a holler. WRIOS2016mr@gmail.com, the Facebook page, and the phone number, which is provided, as always, in the show notes that some people read by swiping to the left, swiping to the right, or swiping up on their podcast app of choice. And with that, Dan, did you have a movie-themed goodbye for us? I don't know why I'm doing a slightly Irishy accent on
don't know
this. Well, St. Patrick's Day is a big thing in Savannah, so yeah, maybe. I got nothing.
Okay, well, I don't know. This was a tough one, man. There's a lot of good lines in this movie. So I'll have to go with from my top to your bottom, from your bottom to my top, from my middle to your middle. Be good, John, and I just might give you a little.
I'm not surprised that you went with a line from the marvelous Lady Chablis, rest in peace.
Yes. The runner up was, it's like, I never come into office on Sunday. Bad juju.
Oh, yes, I love that line. Oh, I never come into the office on Sunday.
If we recorded this yesterday, which was a Sunday, I probably would have used that one.
Oh, well, okay. I like that you included it in the also rans. So, all right, and with that, listeners, we will see you in 2 weeks with
The Hobbit.
The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey.
Awesome.
Ah.